The Art of Yes. Interview with Jeff Michalski. Hello, Jeff. Today,
Hello.
my guest is Jeff Michalski, which is in Polish, and I have to say that today. Michalski, Jeff Michalski. Dzień dobry.
Dzień dobry. Pani.
Yay! Dzień dobry panu. Hello, Jeff. How are you?
Hi. I'm very good, and how are you doing?
I'm fine. I'm so excited to have this wonderful possibility to talk to you.
Well, thank you so much. It's late there, right?
Yeah, pretty late, but it's 9 o'clock, so it's not very...
Okay, not bad. Okay.
It's evening.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff, so good to see you. We've met recently just on the meeting with Joe Bill in one of his meetings. I never had such a great chance to talk to you, and now is the time that I can discover more about you. I would like to talk about improv, but I would start with a little bit of what we already started. You have a Polish roots, and I'm really interested where it comes from.
Well, it comes from my grandparents on my father's side were both Polish immigrants, and is Galicia sound right for southwestern Poland?
Silesia, yes, Śląsk.
Yeah. Okay, so they're from there. They moved to Chicago, and then they had a bunch of children, like really a dozen, but only 9 survived. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I grew up in what's a Polish neighborhood in the north side of Chicago. Went to the parish of St. Stanislaus Kuska, which is the oldest Polish church in Chicago. Mm-hmm. And it was across the street from a park called Pulaski Park, and the public school in the neighborhood was Kosciuszko. So obviously this area of Chicago was settled by Polish immigrants. And so most of the people around where I lived, not exactly where I lived, but my neighborhood, were Polish-speaking families, mothers, the kids. The nuns spoke Polish at our parish. And the assumption was that everybody spoke Polish, but not me. So I think that helped with my comedy, because it's that miscommunication and things like that lead to laughter.
And also pretending that you understand.
Pretending that I understand, yeah, because I did pretend. After a while, it was pointless for me to constantly go, I don't speak Polish, and then shake their head at me and wave their finger about what's with your parents, so. But my dad didn't speak Polish, he did, but not in our household. And that was also a thing for not just our community, but other immigrant communities, where parents stop speaking their native tongue so that their children get used to speaking in English and the like. So I was there, but I was an outsider because I didn't speak the language. And I was funny because of that, because people would laugh at my antics in trying to communicate. Or not. Trying to guess what people are arguing about is really a fun exercise, right?
Yeah.
And in improvisation, they have gibberish, right? Spolin has the gibberish games. Mm-hmm. And she created those specifically because she was running workshops in immigrant communities. And they were, a lot of times, you have Italian immigrants, and you have Polish immigrants, and you have German immigrants, and they don't speak the same language, but they all have stories from their countries that they can tell, children's stories or And that's where she created gibberish, so people could tell those stories in gibberish, and you're still communicating what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the place, some of the places she taught were not far from my neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
There's a place called Eckert Park on Chicago Avenue, and also a Polish community, but moving into Italian, right? And they had these places called settlement houses that she and Neva Boyd, who was her mentor, would teach theater, improvisation, all kinds of stuff. Because Viola was in charge of the entire park district for recreation. So she also was in charge of wood shops and other trade skills and all kinds of different things besides theater. So she has very interesting notes on these things at the University of Northwestern University in the library there. And you get a real good sense of just seeing how deep her approach was. Do you know who Viola Spolin is?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, some people don't. Some people think it starts with Dell, but it doesn't, right?
True, true. Tell me, because you're coming from Chicago, which is Mecca of improv, but you're not only improviser, you're also an actor. So for me, it's always amazing how this happens in States, because very often it starts with acting and then comes improvisation, or opposite, or sometimes together. How improv and acting found you? When and how you started to do it?
Well, I got a low draft number during the Vietnam era, and in order to avoid going, because they're kind of ratcheting down the war, but it made it more dangerous. So I enlisted in the Navy for my time there. And when I got out, my brother picked me up. And I was a very funny person all the time, in the Navy, wherever, it doesn't matter. I was just a funny person. And probably because of the language things. And then for me to try to interpret what people mean, even if you're suddenly thrust into a class system as pronounced as the military. So he picked me up and he drove me to a Joe Forsberg's Second City workshop. And he said, "You belong here." That's what he said, "You belong here." And he just dropped me off. And I went into the class. I watched the first class, and I went and saw a show that my brother was in on the weekend. And then I was in the class, and it was sort of like I was home. It's like, this is my tribe. I'm home. Not that they understood me, but they laughed at me.
Good start.
So I started performing almost immediately. I didn't wait for somebody to go, "You're ready to perform." I started going to coffee shops with people and improvising right away. And because it was all new to me, whatever I was learning, I was putting right back the skill, not the game, the skill I was putting into practice in front of an audience almost immediately. And and I went to Columbia College with my GI Bill, and my major, if you want to call it that, was writing, but I also took a lot of the theater classes too. And the teachers were, David Mamet was a teacher there, and Michael Cullen, who was a guy that ran a thing called the Travel Light Theater Company. Columbia College hired professionals to teach for their film departments and for their theater departments and their writing departments. And that was both good and bad. The good was that you're meeting professionals and you're getting an education from them. The bad part was that they weren't in class very often because they were working, right? So you had a lot of time where you just came to class and there's no teacher there. And so that was a little bit frustrating. That's why I majored in writing, because the writing teachers were more likely to be there than the acting teachers. And they used a style that was related to story theater, which is Paul Sills' Viola's son, did a thing called story theater, and the writing department, this guy named Charles Schultz or John Schultz, and he was from the University of Iowa, and they used a kind of communal storytelling to help you learn to write. And so that was interesting. I mean, all these things all have the same roots for me. That's the other thing that happened, is these things all had the same roots. The first show I did was directed by, what was his name? Anyway, he was the head of the San Francisco Mime Troupe. And they also used parts of story theater to do their shows. And the other director was a woman named Fritzi Solins, who was Bernie Solins' first wife. So right from the beginning, I was inundated with one form or another of Spolin. Even the music, there's a guy named William Russo who was in the music department at Columbia, and he would do these rock operas. It's called the Free Theater, but he had been a partner of Paul Sills at the, these are things I didn't know at the time, but he was a partner with Paul Sills at the Victory Gardens Theater. So I remember wandering in as a young hippie to this workshop as I was walking down the street, because I heard a song I liked, and it was Russo's workshop, and they were doing improvisation, but through music. So all that stuff was happening for me simultaneously. And I didn't have to jump over a bar to participate, like you do with theater, right? I did theater, but it was much easier for me to start engaging performance through improvisation. And then really it's my connections through Jo Forsberg, who was Viola's assistant, and she ran her own classes. For a while, the only classes in Chicago. There were no Dell classes at the time, just on and off. And Bill Murray went to her class. And a lot of famous people were in her class first. So she would post auditions, or she would produce shows, plays, and we would do the plays. So mostly everything I learned about theater in the beginning was from her, because she taught Spolin, but she also taught Stanislavski. She had a hybrid approach, and also pop psychology stuff too. So there's all that in there. And but it was hands-on. So you would learn how to run lights, how to hang lights, how to write a running order, all kinds of things that are contingent that you need to put up a show. So it was great. And I took Dell's class too when he was in town. So I bumped between those two. She gave you the more solid theatrical approach. And Dell gave you great stuff, but it was more, in a sense, about pleasing him for students. So it was very competitive for no reason. And improvisation, basically, to do ensemble work, you have to avoid the competition or conflict. Even if there's conflict in a scene, you're cooperating in establishing that you agree to this conflict, right? So otherwise the scene goes nowhere.
So tell me, what young Jeff was struggling with, because improvisation is not a thing we learn in one day. So what did you find at the beginning of your improv adventure difficult for Jeff? Was it difficult?
Almost, this is going to sound weird, but almost nothing.
Oh, that's good.
It was sort of like I landed in my pond. Later on, I did struggle with expanding my education, especially when I got to Second City. because if you were caught flat-footed on an audience suggestion, and Chicago, you know, the roots for improvisation in Chicago are the University of Chicago. So the audiences you got earlier on at Second City were very intelligent, and they would tell you play to at least the intelligence of the audience. So that meant that there were times I was faced with, in front of an audience, faced with having a suggestion that I knew nothing about. And what I did at Second City was primarily, if I came up blank, I would read 3-4 books on whatever it was, so that never happened again. So that became a kind of a continuing education for me, too, and more liberal arts than what I was getting at Columbia College, because it's a specialty school, so you didn't take a lot of math and science there, right?
So did you think at that time that the language of the performing, like of the show, had to be, you know, like intellectual or something like that?
It's not that it has to be; it needs to be. You have to be at least as intelligent as your audience. You have to assume that they know more than you do. So if you don't know, you should. And it's not about it being intellectual. It's about breaking down language for communication. It's about deconstruction, so that whatever you say to me has meaning. And the more that I know, the more opportunity for meaning to emerge from what you say to me, especially if I'm able to deconstruct what you're saying. And I don't have to deconstruct it accurately. It's more of taking something that you said and deconstructing it so that you have multiple pathways to go down. So if you use the word chair in a sentence early in a scene, I would deconstruct chair. So what does chair mean to me? It's a place to rest. It's a place of execution. It's the head of an educational department, right? So I can now deconstruct that and use any of that either for the location, the relationship, or what the scene is about. And it doesn't matter that you were just talking about a chair. It's now expanded into multiple pathways that we can go down. So those are the things I learned at Second City, is the making the scene about something. Because we can have a minor exchange in a scene about pie or, you know, food or what we're eating, and that's a transaction. And there's nothing to be, almost nothing to be learned in a transaction. It's like, I buy the cigarettes. Here's your money. Bye. See you later. Hey. Yeah. But if the scene is about tobacco or smoking or addiction, now the scene's about something.
So this approach of Second City is like coming from the work of everyone?
It started with David Shepard and Paul Sills, and at the Compass Theater, which was just across the street from the University of Chicago. So they were at cross purposes. Paul was using improvisation in a theatrical context. So he would take a play and do the play, but the rehearsal for the play would consist of improvisation and even some improvisation techniques within the play. So he would do the chalk circle, for instance, as story theater. So when they moved, David felt that improvisation could stand on its own because he'd watch the rehearsals and go, wow, this is really fun. So they did viola games in rehearsal, mostly at the Compass. And what they did on stage is that somebody would write a scenario, like Elaine May would write a scenario, and she'd bring it in. And they'd tack up the scenario backstage, and the actors would look at the scenes broken down. no dialogue in the scenes, just a description of what happens.
Mm-hmm.
And they would improvise a one-act play, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So David wanted it to be a theater of the proletariat. He wanted the working class to be doing theater, basically. And so he'd bring in like truck drivers, a group of truck drivers and this and that, and to do improvisation, but they could only do the games, right? And because they weren't there to do anything else. And he wasn't getting traction on it because working people work, right? I mean, it's like I'm a working class person, but in order to do improvisation, I had to be poor. I had to choose to be poor until a certain point when people started paying me to do comedy. So it was a middle class endeavor. And there are people that would tell you later on that satire is in itself a middle class endeavor, in that it's the middle class that has time to reflect on what's happening. They're not in survival mode. So they can sit back and go, what's happening? What's happening with the government? What's happening with this? What's happening with that? What's going on here? And because you have that opportunity, it by its nature became a middle class endeavor. So Paul's thing kind of won out because people like Elaine May, Mike Nichols, were serious about discovery and that Spolin theme. And Spolin is all about discovery. It's all about reflection. It's not about those games. Those games are just catalysts to show you how to approach improvisation. They're not, people do game shows, Spolin game shows, but that's not the point. The point is that you develop a skill in that game, and now you incorporate that skill into improvisation. And that's what the people end up doing in the Compass Theater. And then at a certain point, Paul, Bernie Salins, and Howard Elk, who was Bob Dylan's chronicalist, he did a couple of those movies that Dylan did, opened up the Second City. And they, instead of doing scenarios, one acts, they started doing scenes, individual scenes in it. But their thing was for it to be satirical. And what satire is how your behavior differs from your ideals. Like culturally, we can say, oh, Americans are, this is who we are. This is how we see ourselves. But your behavior betrays that. Mm-hmm. And in that behavior switch, that's the comedy. Mm-hmm. It's, that's where the irony lies, is you think you're this way, but your behavior's this way. And you can equate irony with a joke, and that's what Second City did. Mm-hmm. That was their primary function, not anymore, but their function at the time was not to do political humor per se, or not to do intellectual humor, but in discovering how your behavior differs from your ideals, you discover things. The audience and the players discover things at the exact same moment, and that's when you're truly impacting an audience, mm-hmm. in that discovery moment. So a lot of that's lost now because people have made a lot of improvisational training transactional. And it's like, okay, but you're missing the ultimate art and beauty of this when that happens. So Dell used to say that we're poets. And so what he meant by that is that we were reflecting on who we were, where we were, what the plight was. We're reflecting on it. And in that reflection, you create poetry. And in deconstruction period, you create poetry. Because once I say that a chair is a place to rest, that's poetry. So that became more of Second City's approach, Not that everybody was schooled in it. You certainly had a lot of people that were just funny, that were just a virtuoso at some aspect of theater or improvisation and weren't really improvisers. But in a good cast, there are always 2 or 3 really good improvisers in the cast. So you develop that sensibility. If you watch Pasquesi and TJ, their scenes are about bigger, they become about bigger things. They don't walk into them and make them that way. They discover that by deconstructing whatever it is they're discovering. And by doing that, the scenes and the long form of that night becomes about something. And part of that's repetition, because if you repeat a line that was said at the beginning in a different context somewhere else, then you're creating a gestalt connection between the 2 scenes and with the audience who's recognizing the pattern or the line that you said. And you start creating this form that looks more like writing than it is, because it has the same elements of writing without writing.
But I would like to ask you about discovery, because this is something which, from my point of view, as a student, is not that easy to learn, to have a teacher who is teaching that, and for teacher, I guess, to have tools to teach about discovery. Because sometimes it comes back to the games. We learn the games, but without the subtext about learning how to find the discovery.
What the skill set is, right? The skill set is looking for the discovery. And the way that you do that, number one, you listen, like you listen, aggressively listen to the other player, and you make sense of what they're saying as opposed to challenge them. You go, whatever's coming out of that person's mouth is true for them, and they mean way more than what someone might think they're saying. So Dell would say, treat it as if you were paranoid, what the other player says. And they said, I don't mean mentally ill paranoid, but as if what they were saying had deeper meaning than even what they intended. And that's deconstruction too. I do it in a more direct way. I will actually deconstruct what that other person is saying. And it's a great comedic device, because it's sort of like the beginning of a herald. It scatter shots the suggestion into all these different things, but this happens in a scene. So that's where you discover meaning, is by saying what that person said to you. What does it mean? Right? Not just to you, but what does it mean? What can it possibly mean? All the possibilities. And that's the deconstruction part. And that's when that's part of the discovery. And then you might tell me something, but your behavior betrays what you're telling me, right? That's a discovery. That's a discovery.
It has something to do with the subtext.
Yeah, except that subtext is an abstract. In improvisation, you have to make it a practice, right? That's the difference, is that you're not looking for subtext. You are discovering subtext by defining what it is you're understanding. And that's where the subtext emerges. Viola used to say, this is why we need to get back to Viola, not strictly on the game thing, because people become disciples of Viola or Dell. And suddenly this is my improv dojo. I'm IO, or I'm UCB, or I'm Dell, or I'm Viola, or whatever it is. And that's like having those karate movies they used to have, where one dojo is going to fight the other dojo because we do this style, we do the scorpion style, and we do the whatever style, which is absurd. It's absolutely absurd. So, but you can actually physically practice communication. That's what it is. It's a practice of engagement and communication. And what the discovery is what emerges from that engagement.
Mm-hmm.
So if I tell you you're wrong right away, I've stopped the engagement. I've stopped it. I've created a conflict where none needed to exist. But that also can be deconstructed. The conflict can be deconstructed. And that at that point you actually start having dialogue. And once you start having dialogue, you have, as opposed to debate, you have a flowing scene. You can move in it. So the discovery right from the beginning of the scene, I would say my discovery would be to look at your face and go, you look entranced, or whatever read I give, because that's the beginning of the engagement, is reading your demeanor, because that becomes the undeniable thing between us. It could be that you're not projecting that or whatever, it's just me reading what I see on your face. But that's the beginning of the engagement. It's what Joe Forsberg would call the proposition. And she would also call the suggestion you get from the audience the proposition. So you're not going, I'm going to do what you're going to do. It's let me accept your proposal, your proposition. What are you proposing here? I'll engage with that.
That goes to Meisner technique, right?
I use Meisner in my workshops as not the whole thing, because like I took Meisner with David Mamet, and it was one of the worst classes ever. Now, David's writing style emerges from Meisner, right? So in this thing, it's like, I got a gun. You got a gun? I got a gun. You got a gun? I got a gun. You got a gun? That's Meisner, but it's also Mamet. If you read Mamet's plays, that's his thing. It's just a repetition. But the two classes I took from him, one was in his house in his apartment, a summer class. And basically it was us doing that Meisner technique and him just sitting in the back of the room going, no, 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 no. And then picking up whatever girl he liked in class and going out to lunch with her and then coming back. And but later on, I re-engaged with Meisner in a more direct fashion, and not for the full kernel of it, but just for the read. So I do a Meisner, kind of a bastardized Meisner thing where I give the people on stage a scenario, and then they don't say any dialogue. All they do is read each other's face back and forth. Then they use like, I perceive worry, and the other person reads the face back. And what you see that emerges in that is beats of a scene, actual communication and beats in a scene. So then if you ask the audience what happened in the scene afterwards, they'll give you a full narrative. They may all give you different narrative, but they'll give you a full narrative of what actually happened in the scene. And it's not what those people are projecting. It's only what they really see. And what I use is the idea that we write scenarios in our head every day for every moment where we're engaging outside. So the storytelling's already happening. That's part of the way the mind works. So you let the story emerge for the players in a passive way, and for the audience in a more aggressive and active way. Suddenly people are discovering, I don't have to make up story. All I have to do is read that other person. That's all I have to do, and see what emerges from there. So you have connection right at the beginning of the scene, because I read your face or you read my face. We already have engagement. There's no, we're two cops and a blah, blah, and a this and that. It just emerges because I take you in and I go, this is what I see right now. This is who I see. This is what I see. Not even who defining the person, but only what me and the audience can see. That's it. So I use Meisner for that. And on stage, I read all the time. And Pasquesi reads all the time. And TJ's reading the other player's face all the time. That's where the beat changes happen. And you might not know it, right? Because you're participating in the scene, but I can read it. I'm the other player. I can tell you the subtle change I saw in you. You can tell me the subtle change you saw in me. And you make me conscious of it. And at that point, we're moving. We're having a dialogue in the space. So,
is it difficult for you when you play? Because when we play together with player who reads the same way as we do, so two players is reading and following and discovering.
I always read. That's my practice, is to read the other player's demeanor. I also play kinesthetically with them. So that's a Anne Bogart technique. It's viewpoints. Dave uses that now too. So I use it in a more passive way. I don't force engagement. I just physically reference what is happening between me and the other player. So it could be an unconscious thing where maybe you twiddle your hair or something, and I might not twiddle my hair, but my hand will go up there at the same time. And in that thing, something else has happened. And that discovery of what that means in connection with our relationship moves the scene. But I can't make it happen. I can only respond to the stimulus that's happening, whether it's music or movement. So, and that I do kinesthetic. I would say I start with the kinesthetic because it means that even though we haven't discovered what the scene is, the audience is already seeing us engage with each other. We're moving together in some fashion. I'm not mirroring you. It could be that you nod your head and I put my foot up and down. Doesn't matter, right? So, but to the audience, it looks like, oh, these people are already engaged. And they are. So improvisation is about engagement. It's about engagement with the player, with the audience. And that's what you're doing all the time. If you start fighting the other player and dismissing them, you're delaying the beginning of the scene if you ever get to a scene. Because you're going, whatever you're giving me is not good enough right now.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
You said something like the viewpoints are coming from?
Viewpoints is Anne Bogart. It's further back, and this was an amazing discovery I made, right? But I was cast in a play. It's Commedia. It's The Servant of Two Masters. And the play was already in rehearsal, and it's because some people from the actors gang or something had a falling out in changing venues, and so they lost a bunch of cast members. So there's a guy I knew that was in the Cirque Soleil. He was a clown, but he was also in the theater company. And he called me up. His name's Daniel Passer, great improviser, great clown. He's worked in Russia. He's worked all over the world. And he teaches at Cal Arts now. But he was one of my students at Second City. So he called me up to participate in this play. And I went there, and the only person besides Daniel that I recognized was Hamilton Camp, who was in one of the original Second City companies. He was also a famous folk singer. So he was there, and me and him were the new guys. So we were just watching the rehearsal. And during the rehearsal, there's this whole airline hangar full of people running around, seemingly together, but also wild. It's just, and you know, some guy was running in opposite directions from someone, and he ran out of space, and he started climbing a post. The other person kept moving, he's climbing a post. And Hamilton said, I'm not going to do this shit. And I said, Hamilton, I think they're doing what we do, except it's just physical. And then I found out later that Anne Bogart got the technique from a dance company she observed that had created the viewpoints. And it turns out historically in that dance company was started by Viola Spolin's sister, Beatrice. So I went, this is ours. This is ours too.
Yeah.
So between that, Meisner, anything that has to do with improvisation, jazz, parts of Meisner, viewpoints, that's ours too. And it's what we need to use to inform ourselves. So Viola's got that. She has the mirror, right? She has the mirror exercise. And Beatrice's thing was, well, everyone can't be doing a mirror, but they can be physically referencing each other. And there's other things in viewpoints that have to do with creativity, like pattern and pattern recognition. And to me, pattern recognition is what our brain does. It recognizes pattern. So I don't start with that because I don't know the pattern, but I can observe the pattern while I'm playing and go, oh, this is the pattern. And in repeating that pattern, I also am creating context and a gestalt to a long form or a scene. So,
which is an analogy to your second of three things you love, which is jazz music.
Yeah, and basketball.
And basketball.
Yeah. I would say as an improviser, I'm a point guard. Do you know what a point guard does?
What?
Do you know what a point guard does in basketball? He distributes the ball. He creates plays for other players. And that's, I would say, in terms of improvisation, that's what I do. So you need to sit.
What's similar in jazz and
jazz is the language of jazz is the same as improvisation. And I think that Dell picked it up. It's really, you see it all over the Herald. And Dell didn't have that in the Herald earlier on because I took his class. It's something that emerged in the beginnings of the Herald, which I have, people give me documents, I don't know why, as if I'm going to take better care of them than they would. But someone gave me the notes from the committee doing the Herald. And I also have original scenarios from the Compass, which Roger Bowen gave me. So I have all these things that people give me, and it's like, to take care of it, I guess, or to get it dispersed, and I've done neither. I still have them, but it's a lot of work when you become an archivist. So in jazz, in improvisation, you have what I would call referencing, and Dell would have it where if I did a movement in a scene, let's say did an L-shaped movement, and this is in viewpoints as well. And I walked in an L, in whatever location we were, it didn't matter. And later on in the Herald, maybe the second or third act, someone else walks in an L again, not in relation to the space or anything else. They just repeat that pattern. And that's what jazz does. I hear a phrasing of somebody else in the band, and I repeat it arbitrarily later on. But it seems arbitrary, but it becomes part of the whole thing just because you're repeating it. It's like, with a good jazz band, you can't make a mistake. Because if you make a mistake, everyone will play the mistake as if it belongs. And that becomes the new discovery of how this mistake takes us here, and then takes us back to the melody because we took this journey. It's like an Escher painting. You know who Escher is?
Yep.
Yeah. So you know how there'll be multiple pathways that seem to be going all different directions, but it ends up in the same place. And Bach, there's a book called Gödel, Escher, Bach. Escher's the mathematician, and all those forms are creative forms based on, like in a canon, in the Bach canon, you take a melody line, but you go in different directions. You break it, and you just go in all these different directions. And even if you do that, they'll end up together. If you follow that divergent pattern, it will end up where you started, no matter how many different ways you do it. And that's the other thing I understand about improvisation, is that divergent path is the journey. So in creativity theory, they have about what is the practice of the creative person. And the first thing, especially in ensemble, it's tolerance of ambiguity. If you can't tolerate ambiguity, if you can't tolerate not knowing, you're going to have a hard time improvising. You have to be comfortable with, I don't know what's going on at the beginning. That's what makes you look. Look. So in music, that might be, you practice an instrument every day and you play the same chords, same notes, probably. But every once in a while, a couple of the chords that you play resonate for you that day. And at that moment, you start doing what's called in creativity theory, divergent thinking. You start taking as many pathways as possible between those two chords. That starts becoming the expansion or the deconstruction moment. And the last thing is convergent thinking. And that's when you go, aha, this is a love song. Or it's the third act of the Herald where you go, I know what this Herald's about. You couldn't possibly know what that Herald was about at the beginning. You only can know what the Herald is about in that third set. That's when, because it's looking back and going, what is this? What was this? Ah, this is what it is. And that's what allows you to end it on an organic level. So in jazz, they call it quoting. So you might be playing a song in jazz, an original piece, and suddenly two of the notes are the same as a popular song. So you play a phrase of the popular song until you can jump back into what you're improvising. And that's referencing. But in jazz, it's called quoting. So even the functions of the different instruments, I go see jazz improv all the time, especially when I'm in Chicago, because Chicago's a unique city artistically, is that you can have exposure to great art without having money. And so by watching that, I was able to go, and also dealing with Fred Kaz, who was a musical director. And that's my point, was that Del learned about that jazz stuff from Fred. So I go to these things, and the first thing is just sounds like a cacophony, but then individuals start repeating other people's patterns. And by and adding on to them, repeating them and then adding on to them. And by doing that, they start creating a cohesive piece in an improvised setting. And that's what we do as well. When we're at our best, that's what we do.
Great.
Yeah.
I love this chatting with you.
Oh, thank you.
Really. Yeah. Oh my God. So interesting. There is this format called the construction.
Yeah.
This comes from Dell directly.
Yeah. Yeah, but I'm not familiar with their deconstruction. I use it in a more direct. I think they do it off a story. and they go backwards and deconstruct the story. So if I'll tell a story and they'll tell you what happened before then and what did that mean and this and that and that. And I do it in a more direct fashion. I do it straight off what the other player's saying to me, deconstructing that and deconstructing the patterns that emerge and repeating the patterns in some form or another.
So what is, sorry.
Go ahead. I was going to say at the beginning of the Herald, the way it used to be done, which kind of helped with the gestalt of the entire Herald, was an audience suggestion would come up on stage, and then the cast would kind of move with each other and just say what I called wild lines. And it was whatever the suggestion meant to them or suggested to them. And it could be wildly diverse, because if someone said a band name, for instance, like Cream, what might come out of my mouth is nothing about Cream, but about lava lamps, because that was an artifact that was around during the 60s. So I'd throw out lava lamp, and somebody else would throw out something that's connected to lava lamp and the Cream, and maybe the title of a Cream song. And those wild lines start creating the gestalt for the audience. Because if you land on any of them, you deconstruct that. And what emerges is a real gestalt between the audience suggestion, what emerges from the player, and how the long form is develops that night. You're kind of influencing what's going to happen by what you land on and what you shout or say in the beginning. Because now you can take the lava lamp, and maybe in the second act of the Herald, somebody's doing a cowboy scene, but there's the scene's not about a lava lamp, but there's a lava lamp in the scene. So now this starts connecting everybody subconsciously from that scene all the way to the beginning of the Herald, and the Cream again, the band. So then it starts influencing the way our consciousness works, which is pattern recognition, and going, you're suddenly in the story because you're making the same discoveries as the players are. So a lot of that's missing now, because in order to do a Herald in a 20-minute set format, which is good for the venue, you take shortcuts in the development of the Herald that don't allow you to play a fully Herald. It's like when I go see improvised jazz, it's a cacophony at the beginning. But from the cacophony emerges order, because people start repeating elements of the cacophony. And that itself creates something new. So there's it's an important part of the Herald that has pretty much disappeared. And it disappeared. Some of it disappeared with the clap cut. You know, that when people clap and to change the scene over. What it means is that people no longer have to be able to play a full scene. Now, why that helped with pacing for a 20-minute spot? If you use it all the time, then you miss the opportunity to learn how to play a full scene show.
So do you teach people, or do you direct teams to develop their own long forms?
I do. I show them how to do a long form, and then hope that they can develop their own styles. Because that's the difference, is that how you interpret is your style. That becomes your style. So if you're someone that always sees the absurdity in things, well, that's your style. That's your comedic style, is finding the absurd. So I encourage people to discover their styles. And I do that in a stand-up class, really. Because with stand-ups, people try to be somebody else. They try to be Robin Williams, or they try to be Mort Saul, they try to be someone else. And that's not how the audience is reading them. So the first thing I do is when they do their act for the class, I ask the audience, what is this person? Who's this person? Forget about what they said, who is this person? And once you can identify that, you can start rewriting your material in the style that you're already presenting to the audience. And that becomes your style. And it becomes natural because of that. But that same thing's true in improvisation. So there's people that are virtuosos at certain things.
Great.
Like being the teacher in a scene, for instance. There are people that always want to take control of the scene and be the psychiatrist or the teacher or the person in charge. And they can be good at it, but they're not a full improviser. They're a virtuoso. They're really great at this thing.
So where have you seen the show which really surprised you? Like, like kind of format which was new to you, surprising, fun, I don't know, special in kind of way, I don't know, inspiring?
Well, seeing Paul Sills' story theater, because that stories are always changed. The source stories change. But also at Second City, there was a company. Before I got to Second City, there was no club improvisation. We invented it. The group of people in Chicago at that time invented club improvisation. And they did it because there are only 6 spots available at Second City on stage. 6, and then maybe another 6 that were in a touring company. And so Joe Forsberg and Dell have this classes of 40 people. And in Joe's case, maybe close to 100, right? What are those people supposed to do? Well, some of us went out to churches or nightclubs or coffee houses and asked if we could build a stage in there. And we did improvisation or sketch shows. So some of those groups became famous in the city of Chicago. One was the St. Vitus Dancers, which I was in, and then the original Comedy Rangers. One was the Reification Company. One was a group called Moving Targets. There was one that went to New York called the Chicago City Limits. But I saw a show at Second City that Dell directed, and these were Dell's students and Joe's students that were in one of the groups that was playing nightclubs. And they did a Second City show, and I'd seen other Second City shows, but they did a Second City show that was physically vibrant, intelligent, and aggressive in the way they played. And that was club play. Moved into a Second City format. And the show was called The 30 Years War. Jim Belushi was in it. And a lot of great people, Rob Reiner. A lot of people ended up writing for SNL and other venues. It exploded. It was like, yes, this is what I learned inside the Second City format. It was less formalized. At time to time, there becomes a cookie cutter approach to Second City, and that always needs to be disrupted at some point. So the next big disruptor was Nate Herman, who had been a musician and a writer for SNL, and I hired him to take my place. I directed the ETC company, created and directed it, but when they wanted a replacement, I wanted someone totally independent from the Second City thing. I wanted somebody, he had been at Second City, but I wanted someone that was going to be disruptive in a creative fashion, and he was. And the next big disruption was Mick Napier came in, and he brought an annoyance style, but it didn't become the annoyance, it became the annoyance influencing Second City. So So that disruption in pattern is the discovery point. But in ensembles, in personal work and everything else. So those are the things that kind of struck me over the years. And then seeing jazz, just seeing great jazz bands just was like, yeah, this is what it's about, this here.
So this was in the old times. And did you see like recently like show which was really new for you, like really inspiring?
Well, working on The Servant of Two Masters, and now this also is 10 years back, was also inspiring because now I could see viewpoints connection to what I was doing. Then I went to that show that I sent you the picture of, right? That was a jazz festival. So I was working the jazz festival, so I got to see everybody and got to know a lot of people and just going, this is my home too. And what can I do to make what we do on stage as alive as a good jazz band, as immediate. So those are the type of things that have influenced me. William Gibson. As far as shows that I've seen recently, you know, I've seen Dave and TJ and Dave's show, and I understand it, and I go, well, yeah. I've seen some heralds over the years at I.O. that the use of chorus became kind of like, yeah, that's character of the space in a fabulous way. But my big thing was I produced a show on the Santa Monica Pier called the Second City Alumni Jam. And it was anybody, whoever was in Second City could play. And we would do 4 heralds. We'd have like 20 some players, and it'd be like Ryan Stiles and Farley and Colbert and people from the original Second City company, Severin Darden. And so I directed in Toronto as well, so I know all the Canadians. So we had this hodgepodge of 28 people doing 4 heralds a night, different groups. They picked from a hat. That's how they picked who was in their company. So it could be an all-girl, all-woman herald, or didn't mess with that at all. I always kept one number out so that I could fill in, or someone else can fill in. So if it was a group that didn't have what I call a point guard or quarterback, somebody that would take care of all the other players, then I'd put that person in a particular company. So that was the only kind of thing. But I did lights for everybody. Fred Kaz played the piano for us. And that's where I learned the most. I can't even say the word, just great sets. Every week there was at least one great set. And sometimes there were 4 great sets. Rusowski played in that too. And what I learned, and I also had people from the Groundlings, because I had been in the Groundlings as well. So what I discovered was not what everybody does that was different, but what everybody did that was the same, that made a long form work. And that became an inspiration, seeing all those shows. Matt Groening, who wrote The Simpsons, used to bring his writing crew in to watch us almost every week. His whole crew would be sitting there watching us do this long form. And it was really one of the greatest ongoing shows I was ever involved with. And because I was producing the show, I got to see every set, and I got to participate in one of the sets as well. So it was a fantastic, inspirational learning experience to see all these great improvisers from different years at Second City, from different disciplines, improvising together.
Is there anything in improvisation which is for you kind of challenging, or there's like nothing?
Yeah, well, doing certain styles. I mean, we used to make a song, and I did them a lot, but I was good at blues, maybe, or maybe jazz. But if the audience shouted out opera, I was lost. Right? I didn't have that skill set vocally, power-wise, informational-wise. I really had only seen one opera in my life. And so if there's certain stylistic things that are called on, that could stump me. I'm trying to think of anything else I had difficulty with. You know what? Because I was an outsider growing up, I always had to fit in. I always had to improvise my role in whatever group I was in. So not knowing the language I grew up around made me adaptable and playful and open to anything coming in, and trying to define what was coming at me. So in a way, my background forced me into it.
Why now it's so many inspirations we take and we do not deconstruct them? We want to fulfill audience.
Yeah, which is a dead end, because if you try to do what the audience suggested literally, you're a step removed from your imagination and their imagination. It's like parody. You know the word parody? So a parody is never as good as the original. And the second parody is nothing. Because you're being judged now. You told the audience, judge me by how well I do what you suggested exactly the way you intended it. But you're actually there to take the suggestion as an inspiration, as what does that mean to me? And what it means to you can be totally different than what the accepted grouping is. All right, I'm just gonna make one up. Like, have you played Monopoly?
Yeah, a long time ago.
Okay, so if someone says jail as a real suggestion, most people are going to think about jail experience, whatever. My mind went to Monopoly. Go to jail. Go directly to jail. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Now that is a personal thing that jail inspired in me for that moment that's broader than the suggestion of jail. It has in there compensation is in there. It has restriction. It has in the Monopoly game, it takes you out of business for a while. So that now that's a bigger thing because it's been deconstructed by me not trying to please the audience, but just going, that's what emerged in me as Monopoly. Now off of that, you can go to all these things where white collar crimes remain unpunished. Right. Or they're fined, or, you know, corporation is fined and they're not put in jail but in the United States, the Supreme Court has said a corporation is a person. But that person could commit a crime and not go to jail because it really isn't a person. Right? But that's that. Then there's irony there and stuff. But see, all that can emerge off Monopoly. That's just that little. And you have 3 or 4 people that are contributing in that way, that inspiration part. It's like I won't try to do what I said. I will not try in the long form to do what I said. I'm going to respond to what you said. That's what I'll bring back, what you said, not what I said. And Del would hope that you were inspired by what the other person said, and so they could let go of that, so they could truly improvise, because they're not trying to tell their story.
It comes again to discovery, right?
It's all discovery. It's all like what you do on stage, physically, how you play is not the context of the scene. The context changes every time you improvise. But what you do to improvise doesn't. You're listening, you're reading the other person, you're breaking things up and you're making discoveries. That's what you're doing all the time. You're playing with that other player. And whatever the suggestion is doesn't mean anything because the context changes. The play remains the same. Musicians play their instruments the same way every time they play. If they're improvising jazz, the content doesn't matter. It's how they play. And then what emerges from that. So it's what comes up on stage is a byproduct of you playing together.
If we could go through conflict, and if you could explain how you treat conflict, because you said something that you treat it as a personal thing, and I would like to talk about it.
Well, what I'll do is identify the conflict and go, so what you're saying to me is this. And at that point, it changes the conflict. It's just like a read. For instance, if you went in to see your employer and you wanted a raise, okay, and you're angry about it, and you walk in the door, the boss can see you're angry, right? If he reads your anger, if he goes, oh, you're angry, that gives you license to say what it is that you're angry about. He could just throw you out of the office, get out of here, right? Nothing happens, there's no communication. If there's just a straight conflict, how do you dare you talk to me like this? That's all a conflict, right? But if he reads your anger, and then you're able to say what you're angry about, it dissipates the anger. It changes the moment of conflict to one of dialogue. And something happens off of that. To create conflict is a useless tool in improvisation. It delays the scene. It delays the engagement. It delays anything being able to happen between us or any discoveries to be made because there's just this. So you identify and deconstruct the conflict. State what, not in like on my side, your side. I'm not worried about my side. I'm worried about your side. So if I can state what your conflict is and just give you whatever you want, then I've ended the beat. Well, that'll cost $1 million. Here's a check for $1 million. That conflict is over. That transaction is gone. I want a divorce. Okay. Let's do it. Let's sign the papers. That leads to that. There's no longer conflict at that time, right? You're in an agreement. I don't need to know why. You might want to explain it to me, but actually we've come into agreement that we're doing this, and the reflection becomes the scene and the connection in the reflection and what's happening in the moment. Because I might go, yeah, let's get a divorce. And then you go, wow, you seem happy about that, right? You did the read. And now that's changed the beat. It's changed everything, right? Or me agreeing to getting a divorce made you upset. I go, oh, you're upset. And then it might be, well, I didn't think you'd agree to that so fast. And then now that becomes the scene. It's that thing. It's no longer a conflict. It's a dialogue.
And it's deeper level on the relationship, right?
That's right. Because if the other thing I said to him, I think, is that you don't need to defend a fictional character. So if you make an accusation toward me in a scene, I just accept it and go, yeah, that's who I am. And I might make a virtue out of it. So, I mean, if it's something that's particularly damning, I can make a virtue out of it. I did that for you. I did that for us. So Dell said to me once, I was at Second City, and Second City was very competitive at the beginning. And I kind of helped change the culture with the ETC, but people would actually conspire against you. You were their competition for other actors, right? If they could somehow, if they had a connection with the front office and they can go, Jeff Michalski is this and that, and they're only getting it from one thing, they could, curb your engagement and your involvement and stuff. So I said to Del, being here is making me paranoid. And he said, let's change that word to metanoia. Let's agree that everybody is conspiring against you, but it's for your own good. So that's a way of disarming language, right? And accept the terms that I said, that I feel this way, accept that that's legitimate, but change the terminology. That people are conspiring against you for your own good. So that changes your whole attitude, right? So two things are in there. The deconstruction is in there, but also legitimizing my fear, right? And making a virtue out of it. So those are ways that you can avoid conflict. Not avoid, but deal with conflict as it emerges.
Where the conflict comes from, because it is everywhere.
It's an invention. It's like, it's a way for people to think that they're controlling the scene. So if I can start a fight with you, I've put you on the defensive. I don't have to play with you for a while, right? Because I've put you on, I'm telling you, oh, you change. You're on the defensive. Go, you figure this out. This terrible thing I said about you. And I can just stand here and try to think of things to do. Right? So it's a tactic, and it's not a good tactic. It doesn't work in an improvisation. So when, let's say you're attacked, and you go, you would own up to it and go, yeah, that's me, blah, blah, make a virtue out of it. And then they find another thing that they're obviously just making it up. Now, you can go, it's a pattern. You recognize a pattern and go, now you seem to just be making things up. And then now, it becomes, now, if that person is a good improviser, they'll continue making things up. They'll make that part of who they are and own that. And now you have this relationship, and a consenting relationship where you're with a fabricator, like Baron von Munchausen. You know that character? Oh, he's a character from, there's actually a movie out with him in it, but he was a liar on kind of the most grandiose liar. Such a great liar that's what people loved about him. So he was always the hero. He was always a star. He was always, and it's wild, 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 crazy fabrications. But because he was all into it and just that's who he was, he became a lovable character. So that's what I mean by finding the virtue in the negative labeling. Labeling itself is a problem in improvisation. And that came up because people were doing club improv, because they only had 10 minutes and they had to get things done. And that's probably where the conflict came from too. It's like, what do we do? Well, I don't know what to do. Oh, you're an asshole. And that's the beginning of the scene. It's like, okay, yeah, I am. I admit it. Then you've diffused the situation.
You've said also one more interesting thing, which I think is worth to mention, that if somebody calls you in a scene or gives you an attitude, you take it, accept it, and you use it.
Because I can respond in any attitude. I know that. about me, about everybody else. That I can take that, I can become that. And it's a great casting thing, because how often am I going to be cast in real life, in professional work, in all these different ways? How often am I going to be the villain, right, in something? I can play that. I can be the villain. I want to be the villain, right? The villain's more interesting. He's kind of thinking about things. So yeah, you accept whatever they give you, you double down on it and deliver through that. And that's what changes the context, not me thinking of something, but me changing my demeanor changes the context. I can say, Mary had a little lamb, its fleece was white as snow. And I can say it angry, and it takes on a whole different context than if I just recited it. So that means something. In the deconstruction, what have I got against lambs? What do I mean by Mary had a little lamb? So that, so you know, it's just that becomes part of the practice that leads to discovery. Now I discover something about my character, that I see nursery rhymes that have a sexual connotation in it.
Let's talk about ETC for just a second, because it's a super huge part of your life.
Yeah.
Doing this since 80s, as far as I know.
1983, I think. Yeah. It was my rebellion at Second City. So I put myself on the line that I could be fired at any time because I disobeyed orders. So what Bernie wanted to do with that space was to have a touring company play that space and do best of Second City material. And the people in my touring company were all veterans of club improv. They're people that had already been established. They already got great reviews. They already were accepted. And my thing was, well, why are we here? I'm not here to do best of. I'm here to create new material. So when we got that space, that's what I was doing surreptitiously with these other people. And Joyce Sloan, who was one of the producers, knew that, but she couldn't outwardly condone it. So she just acted like she didn't see what we were doing, but aided us every step of the way. And we opened a review by secretly inviting critics to our show. And the reviews were astounding. And the producer of Second City and director of the main stage said to Joyce, fire Jeff and Jane. Jane's my wife, and she was my partner in that. Her and Jim Fay and a few other people, Bill Applebaum. But I was generally the target. So, because I'm an outsider, right? So he said, fire Jeff and Jane. And Joyce went and got the bar receipts because they were able to open the back bar of the Second City and sell drinks inside the ETC. And because we had a successful show and we were sold out, she said, look at these receipts. Look at what we're getting. Look at all the money we're making. So he let us do that one show. And then I did the same thing again. But the second time, Joyce called me up and said, I'm not saying anything, but Bernie's out of town. And so we invited critics again, and we opened the show again. And he had the same response, but we got a review that started off with the line, you could go through the entire history of Second City and not find a company this good. That was the opening line of the Chicago Tribune review. So he couldn't do anything. So it was an act of rebellion, and I didn't care. I was always told I was going to be fired, but I didn't care because at that point, so why am I doing this? How many years have I been doing improvisation? Why am I doing it? I'm doing it to be able to create my own material and our own material and this ensemble's material. And so that's what it was. So he messed with us. He would fire my not fire my entire cast, move my entire cast to New York or onto the main stage, and then give me people he was firing. And we would still out review the main stage because I used the principles that Paul Sills used and the principles of improvisation and everything else that I learned from Paul and Dell and everybody else. So our shows had a chance for success because they weren't being dictated from the outside. It was the ensemble creating what was happening. I organized it, wrote running orders. I didn't tell people what to make scenes about, ever. I would say to them what I thought their scene was about on viewing it as a third eye, and sometimes that helped focus the scene. But I was never about telling. For me, it's all about the discovery, both internally and externally. What's the discovery? When is the audience going, aha, aha, with you at the same time? That's the excitement for me, is then when we're together, when it emerges, boom. So the ensemble became more important to me than anything. And that was from talking with Paul Sills, and they asked him, who do you put in your company? And he said, whoever comes in the door. So I treated the people that Bernie was discarding or the other outsiders that came into the ETC cast, and that's how I treat it. Whoever walks in, what are they bringing in? How do I use or help them discover what it is that they're presenting? What do they already have that's unique, and let's focus on that. So that was my approach with ETC, and it became a big hit. We did 5 hit shows, and they had many more after that. I don't have any connection to it. They have a plaque up for me and Jane up there now. But other than that, I didn't get any material reward from it or anything. It was an act of passion. We got paid, as actors. And then that led to me directing up in Toronto and then in Los Angeles. So, so the unique thing for me was I got to direct and be in the shows at the same time. So for my thing, it was about ensemble, and that included, if you were directing, you could be in the company too, as long as you took care of the other players first. I made sure I got everybody else's scenes up before I went, okay, now what do we need? What do we need to complete this? And it helped me out because it changed my performance skills. How do I fit in? And when everybody's playing that way, without fear of doing the wrong thing, then something great can emerge.
Mm-hmm. Just to clarify, these shows were scripted.
Yeah, they're scripted, but what I did with them, a lot of them, I created templates that allowed for improvisation in the middle of the scene. Not every scene, but every show had at least a couple scenes where we knew what the beginning was and we knew what the end was, and the rest was improvised. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of that in the ETC shows. Mm-hmm. And also playing out in the house, using the audience as another character.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's great.
So, yeah. So that was also in almost every show. And it's become a mainstay thing for the ETC. That's one of the things they still do, is they play out in the house a lot. And, so yeah, I had a big effect on culture there as far as like how actors treated each other. Mm-hmm.
How did it change? And
because there was a hierarchy for a while there before that. Mm-hmm. So the hierarchy was the director, and then a couple veterans in the company, and then everyone else had to be told what to do. Mm-hmm. Or things were over-directed, things like that. And my thing was, no, if you're in the company, you're in the company.
Jeff, let's talk about acting, because you played, I think, in more than 20 movies.
30 something, I don't know how
More
many
than
now.
30. That's
Yeah.
it's not listed where I've read the rest.
It's in the high 30s. So what happened was, first off, I did a couple films before, but Gary Marshall came to the ETC and saw a show. And I was the director, and he grabbed me, and I was in the company too, and he grabbed me afterwards, and he said, I'm going to use your company in a movie. And oh, thanks, whatever, right? And then he went away. And then probably a few months later, he came back into town, and it was true. He was going to use our company in the movie. So I did Nothing in Common with Tom Hanks and Jackie Gleason. And then when I didn't come out to LA right away, came out in '89 to direct a show. But when I came out, Gary cast Jane and myself in most of his movies. And I started getting other movies as well, and because I was in LA, and that's how it developed. So, like I said, the improvisational formatting at the beginning for me was theatrically connected, because Joe Forsberg taught Stanislavski and theatrical things in her class, and Second City is a theater. Ultimately, you use improvisation in it, but you're acting. You have the same skill. You're developing the same skills that an actor develops. I think because of my improvisational skills, I was cast in films where they didn't quite have the character laid out, and they wanted someone that could improvise. Even with the Laundromat with Meryl Streep, I think they wanted improvisers in there to play with her, to make the script seem less didactic, I guess.
Yeah.
So
I just wanted to mention, because this is the movie where I've seen you by coincidence, because I just clicked on Netflix, Laundromat, and yeah, there is a super great cast, because there is Meryl Streep playing in, Antonio Banderas, and
Gary Oldman.
So it's super great cast, and then you are in between them. So how was it to play with this people who are in the
well, I've worked with Al Pacino, I've worked with Tom Hanks, I've worked with Meryl Streep. I mean, a lot of people. And Gary used to say that he hired me because I give good take, meaning he doesn't have to shoot a lot around me, that I'm going to be, if not spot on, in there in one take, because I'm natural. I'm listening to the other player. I'm just, they're another player to me, and I'm doing everything I do in improvisation. I might not do it verbally, but I'm deconstructing the way they delivered their line, in my response, because now I've attached meaning to what they're saying in it. So, and I was just fortunate to be cast and to be trusted to play with stars. And also people became famous after I worked with them as well. So you have that too. They're just your peers, and now they're stars. So I worked with Jim Carrey. I worked with Robin Williams in a student film early on, before he was Mork or anybody. He was just, it was a film that I was in the Groundlings at the time, and I was in the Groundlings before I was in Second City. And we did a AFI film called The Last Laugh, and Robin played a comedy student, a stand-up student, and I played a Russian exchange comedy student. So, and they didn't have a script for me. I just had to be a Russian comedian, I guess. So I could do a Polish accent, which is close enough, right?
But I wanted to ask you, what improvisation gave you? You almost said that gave you to play in the scripted films, and this is anyway different environment. You know, cameras, people moving pose and everything. And opposite way around, what acting gave you in improv? What did you learn from both of these?
Well, it's a function. They inform each other. The improvisation informs that, and the acting informs my improvisation. But they're the same skill. I'm reading the other person. I'm listening to that other person. I'm trying to make them look good because they're the star, right? Well, acting and improv gave me the skills to get things across in the sense that there is such a thing as comedic timing. You develop comedic timing by playing in front of an audience. You develop intensity by connecting. It's the same thing you do in improv, though. By connecting to you, I'm inviting the audience to see what's happening between us. I'm not concerned with them. I'm not concerned with the camera, unless they tell me that I need to have my head a certain way, or I need to find this camera or whatever, which that's the most difficult part, right? So one informs the other. That's all I can say.
What's the best moment or biggest fun in doing movies? What do you remember, or maybe some event which happened to you? I don't know.
Well, I don't know. I did a film called Star Maps, where I got to play the bad guy, and I loved that. And it was because I was able to do it in a way that made him look more businesslike than evil. I mean, I don't know if this is funny or not. I got cast in a Gary Marshall movie with Al Pacino, and my brother was epileptic and had grand mal seizures. So they let me play the seizure customer. I had a seizure during the scene, and then Pacino and Michelle Pfeiffer fall in love over this guy having a seizure. Well, I did a perfect grand mal seizure, which is disturbing, and it actually hurts to flail yourself around like that. And they had someone from the Epilepsy Foundation going, yeah, that's exactly what it looks like. But for Gary Marshall, it was too much to see a real seizure because he's using it as a prop for this engagement between Michelle Pfeiffer and him. So he had me cut back on my seizure. So that was, and I still bruised and everything afterwards, but so is that. And I have a lot of gratitude towards a lot of the really great actors because they're very generous people, mostly. So I had a thing with Elaine May once, and it wasn't a film, but you know who Elaine May is? Yeah, she came to a show of a theater. I've started a lot of theaters too. So I started this theater in Santa Monica called Upfront Comedy, and I had the original cast from Second City opening night on stage. I see someone laugh in the audience, and I go, that's Elaine May. And I walk backstage, and I go to Severin Darden, who knows Elaine. I said, I think Elaine May's in the audience. He goes, oh, it can't be Elaine. She'd be heckling us. And it turned out it was Elaine, and she came backstage, and I was so starstruck by her. I told you before, people give me stuff, so people gave me a bunch of Compass scenarios, and 3 of them were written by Elaine May that I had, originals, right? Had from the bar, they had the stamp of the beer company that supplied beer to it. So I was going to do something stupid and walk up to her and ask for her autograph. And I got the scenarios out of the drawer, And I was walking toward her with the scenarios, and I looked at her. I had a pen, but it's hidden. And I got to her, and she looks at me like, "What do you want?" And I went, "I think these belong to you." And I gave her the scenarios. I never got them signed, or I had copies of them, but I gave her the originals back.
Oh.
So I've had moments like that with just a few people, though, just her. Everybody else I feel like they're my peer, even if they're a star. I feel like I'm in the scene. I'll do what I can for this, with the scene, with this person, but we're peers. Right? And I think that's the only way you can work.
So still coming back to the fear. So when you are in this stressful situation, like monologue with cameras, do you have kind of coping, I don't know.
Well, this comes from Dell. He would say on stage, follow the fear. Meaning whatever it was that you were afraid of doing in a scene, if you're afraid of it, do it. Because that's how you overcome that fear. And on stage, no choice you make is going to kill you. The fear might feel like it will, but you actually gain courage, stamina, knowledge. You gain by following the fear. The other thing he said was, there's a pony in the pile of shit. Meaning if you dig in to whatever mundaneness that's out there, if you dig in, you will find the pony. There's a pony in the middle. There's a reward in following the uncomfortable. So that's how you deal with the fear. And you go to the other player, engage the other player, because then it's not you. I'm scared. It's not you, it's you going to that other player. And now you're in it together. But not in the fear together, unless they're not connected to you. And then they'll distrust you, right? Or you'll distrust them because you're not connected. So you go for the engagement again. You read their face. You read them on your back. So.
Oh my God, that's great. I will shortly wrapping up because oh my God, we already talked 2 hours.
Oh my.
That's lovely.
It was wonderful to talk to you.
Yes. So the very last, no, let's see, I have 2 last questions. One is, why do you love improvisation?
It's really where I found myself, right? So I love it because it makes, and this is going to sound weird, but everything I've gained in making me a better human being has been improvising. Just the practice of improvising makes you a better human being. Like when I go to Starbucks, I engage the barista. I go, "Oh, you look happy today." And because I do that, they can tell me the story. Or if I go, "You look upset today," they'll tell me the story. So that's me practicing improvisation, because I tell my students to do that too. But it also becomes an engagement and a relief, mostly, to the stranger that you're dealing with. You've told them, "You're not a barista, you're a human being, you have a story. And I see something on your face, and if you want to tell me the story of what's on your face, you can tell me." I don't say those words, I just do the read. So all those things, the cooperation, Paul Sills used to say, what makes you a good improviser is exactly what makes you a good friend. That you listen without judgment. And you try to help where you can help. So his thing was more in depth than that. You might have to ask Aretha Sills about that. She'll tell you exactly what Paul said. Do you know Aretha?
Not personally, but I know that she's a grandchild.
Yeah, she's Viola's. I met Viola too. It was just wonderful. That's been the great thing, is I've met all these great artists, both in music and in show business, or I came up with them. I mean, Dave Rosofsky was in my class at one point, and I directed Colbert and Farley and people. So you meet people that emerge into what people consider great people, and they are great people. They're great human beings, but you don't know who that's going to be. You don't know who that person that emerges commercially or whatever way. You don't know who that's going to be. So be nice to everybody.
What's your memory about viola? Because it's not so many people now, living people,
Well,
who remember her and could study or meet or talk.
well, I do have some tapes of viola running warm-ups. I can send those to you.
Oh, great.
But I met her after I worked with Paul. I did some story theater with Paul, but I met Viola after her stroke. So besides being paralyzed, she wasn't incapacitated. You could see her thoughtful, loving, supportive person in there. And I also felt like I know her because people said Joe Forsberg copied Viola, like right down to the mannerisms, which she probably did. So when I hear Viola on tape, I hear Joe too, because they did the same type of side coaching. It wasn't. It could feel disruptive when they did side coaching. Like you could take it personally and be hurt by it. Although that wasn't the design of it. She would say, "No judge, no judging. Don't listen to me. Hear me, but don't listen to me. Right? Or hear my voice. Don't respond to the coaching." So, but she grabbed my hand and held with one hand and held it and just looked at me. And it was like we were communicating. Severin was telling her about me. Severin Darden, a great improviser. And Fred Kaz, and she'd heard about me because they were talking, and she was like, just so the intelligence was there and the power was there. So I didn't have the opportunity to experience her as a teacher except through surrogates. But I finally got to meet her as a human being, and it was wonderful. It was a great kind of being. That was the other thing that happened is Fred Kaz, who was my musical director at Second City, had been at Second City forever. When we got to California, he introduced me to the original people, and he would go, "He's one of us." That's what he'd say to them. And that, I mean, for somebody, that's like a great thing. And I don't know how he determined I was one of them, except that my approach to the work, I think. And he also had a word for improvisers. He called them decent freaks. And, somebody grabbed that, somebody from Bulgaria grabbed that as their team name, Decent Freaks. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, they were at the Oslo Festival. There's a Russian woman and an American man. He's a professor in Bulgaria. Yeah. So they'd seen that Decent Freaks thing, or maybe they heard it on Corinne's podcast.
So this is the very, very last question.
That's okay.
When last time did you do something for the first time, and what was it?
I don't know. If anybody asked me to do anything, I say yes. So I don't even know how to describe what would be new. This is new. This engagement. Yeah. And doing shows on Zoom is new.
Yeah, true.
So you make adjustments but they're kind of the same as film adjustments in the sense that I know I'm in this box. And what can I do in this box when I'm performing? I'm not performing right now. I'm just talking to you.
Jeff, that was really lovely, super interesting. I feel like I could still go through the sea of knowledge you have.
Well, if when this virus stuff ends, maybe we can get together either there or here.
Yeah, absolutely.
And,
I would love to. I will.
All right. Okay. Take care.
Take
Nice
care.
talking.
Thank you so much.